I feel like there's this belief that the more you give, somehow like that makes you a good human. And that if you're taking, then you're a bad human. And I just feel like that is such an oversimplification, and it's such a black and white way of looking at things, which again, I think very much comes out of kind of, the cultural milieu we've been in Western society for the last few thousand years.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another call. So, today we have Chelsea with us, and let me tell you a little bit about Chelsea. So, Chelsea Goucher has a burning passion that is found somewhere in between the intersection of consciousness expansion with personal growth and human evolution. The kind of people that we like talking to here on the show. So, it's through her work that she's been able to assist and nurture her clients back to their spiritual center so that they can experience life fully in a more honest and authentic way for them. Now, today, she's joining us to dismantle that myth that it's selfish to put yourself and love yourself first. So, Chelsea, thank you so much and welcome to the call.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And I love the topic we're going to talk about today. Obviously, if I didn't, we wouldn't be talking, number one. But number two, it's being that real, that authenticity, but especially that myth, like we said at the introduction, of so many people have told us that it's selfish, or we feel that it's selfish to love ourselves first and everything. But before that, how did you get yourself into this path? Like, what was that discovery for you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's kind of just how my life has unfolded. I went through an experience in my early 20s of being swept up by drug addiction. And before that, previous to that, I'd been like a straight A student, like class president, homecoming queen, like the whole nine yards. And I had this huge pendulum swing the other way into drug addiction. And when I finally emerged from that, I went right back to being how I was before. I was, just super hustling. I got, really involved in my community. I started building a career in sales. So I did radio sales. I was an executive director for my chamber of commerce in my hometown. And then I got into corporate sales. And, as I started to build my life and, I started having money coming in, I was building back up my reputation in my community. I had, a long-term partner. We bought a house together, and I was like, I am not happy. Like, I was happy, but not really happy, not like soul
Mhm.
happy, truly feeling fulfillment. I felt like there was this pull that there was things I was supposed to be doing with my life that I'd somehow abandoned. And I started to reflect on it, and I was like, maybe this is why I got myself into trouble in the first place, is because I was really navigating my life according to external markers and the
Mhm.
things that people, define success as, whatever that may be. And I started to kind of like dig into spirituality and entrepreneurship, and just like, it was like maybe there's more to life than just what I see here in front of me. And kind of around when I was going through this like curiosity phase, COVID hit. And it was like a complete shift in everything for me, because I think I finally was forced to slow down and really sit with
Mhm.
myself and really start to ask the questions of like, why did my life go this way? Why did I make these choices? Why am I doing anything that I'm doing right now? And I think that and what was going on in the context of the world, I really realized how fear was like really running the show for me in a lot of ways. And that even a lot of the success I built was based on this fear of being perceived as this failure that I'd been in my 20s, early 20s, right? And so I was like trying to prove myself, trying to show my value, trying to, you know, re re-emphasize my worthiness to my community. And so I was acting from a place that like wasn't aligned with my truth, and it was really soul sucking. I felt like even doing corporate sales, I mean, the job itself was like pretty easy. You know, I didn't feel like it was using any of my gifts or any of anything that I came here for really to its fullest potential. And so I just kind of dove down the rabbit hole. I worked with several different coaches. I joined some women's groups and just really did a lot of self study and self practice. And I've kind of just been doing that ever since, for the last 5 years or so, walking this journey and figuring out how I can marry my own personal growth journey and spiritual awakening with this entrepreneurial journey I'm on.
Right. No,
Yeah.
and it's funny because I've been doing this show for a while, and I've been at this spirituality conversations for like my entire lifetime because I've always loved it. And
Yeah.
it's funny because 2020, I hear a lot of people that have come on the show. They're like, something happened in 2020. And it's like, we can call the reality whatever happened, happened. I mean, whatever it was on the outside
Right. Right.
world. But so many people had so many internal shifts during that time. And I can say it from a many different ways, but I'll just keep it simple and say, yeah, I think we were all kind of like, okay, we're locked in. What else do I do? We
Yeah.
had to pause with life, and it gave our soul a moment to be like, oh, by the way, now that you're sitting here, paused, let me, show you all these things that I've been trying to show you your entire life and you haven't seen. And it's
Exactly.
kind of been like that progression. I've seen so many people come out of that year so different, like either physically different or mindset different, but something
Mhm.
clicked inside everybody or a lot of people that was like, oh wow, out of that time
Yeah.
this came. So I it's funny to hear you say that because it's kind of like, oh, of course it did.
Right. No, I mean, I also have talked with multiple other people that had similar experiences, and
Right.
it's been such an interesting time, and I feel like we're kind of going through another really interesting time right now. Um and I'm curious to see what happens with all of it.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
What's the other aha we're gonna come out with, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about that fact that we're talking about today. So many of us have been either told by society, by movies, by whatever it is, that you have to think of other people first. If not, you're being selfish. So
Mhm.
there's like so many different paradigms to that. So how would you start breaking that down for people and getting into this conversation?
I mean, I think the way I was kind of thinking about it before getting on here was thinking about how, I do think that we are taught, especially in Western society and especially as women, that sacrifice is kind of like the highest virtue. And I think there's a
Mhm.
lot of reasons for that. And I'm not like an anti-religious person or anti anything. I'm not anti-man. When I say patriarchy, it's like I think men have been as damaged by the patriarchy as women.
Right.
But I absolutely think that the way, like, we've thought of ourselves as human beings for the last like 2000 years really has like very much been about sacrifice, about having to um purify ourselves, about having to live this like ascetic life, to like that less is more, that like humility means, not boasting, not showing yourself, not wanting to be seen. And so there's all these like things that I think are so deeply embedded in our culture that even people that like aren't raised religiously or don't think that they have any of that in them, they absolutely do, because it's like
Mhm.
interwoven in our society. And like what you said, the messages we see, in movies, the narratives we hear from our teachers or from our parents or our grandparents. And so I feel like there's this belief that the more you give, somehow like that makes you a good human. And that if you're taking, then you're a bad human. And I just feel like that is such an oversimplification, and it's such a black and white way of looking at things, which again I think very much comes out of kind of the cultural milieu we've been in Western
Mhm.
society for the last few thousand years. And so then you hear things like, oh, you can't pour from an empty cup. And you hear that and it sounds nice, but it takes, I think, a lot more work for people to really get down underneath it and start to really embody what that actually means, because it can sound good. And I feel like I spent years hearing stuff about self-love, or watching influencers talk about self-love, or hearing it from my friends or whatever, and not really understanding what that actually meant. Because for me, and I think the way a lot of people sometimes misinterpret it, is it's like you almost hear self love as something that you like should be doing. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, well, I need to love myself. So in order to love myself, I need to do all the things that are going to make me worthy of loving myself.
Mm-hmm.
When really it's about loving yourself exactly where you are, who you are, even with all of your flaws, even with all your imperfections, and particularly with those parts of you that you've been told were bad, quote unquote. So, really like learning to integrate like your shadow, as people often call it, doing shadow work, or, as Carl Jung said, like just, the unconscious. So,
Mm-hmm.
integrating those parts of yourself and really learning to love all of you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of, my intro into that little bit.
Right. No, and it's great because you touch on so many different points. Like for example, what you just said, let me go back to a few things that you just said. So one of them is, so many people have talked about it that it does sound now like a should. Like you should love yourself, that it's like, ugh, don't tell me now I have to do this also. Like don't give it to me like in that way.
Yeah.
And the second part to that is loving yourself as you are, authentically, with the grays, with the wrinkles, with the flat, with the, all these quote unquote imperfections, which is what I'm going to talk about, which society has reinforced throughout the years. So if we don't look like the perfect image of what we see in the magazines, and let's be real, the influencers and the this and the that, we compare ourselves. And then it becomes more of a self love, as in, is it really self love, or is it, I want to improve myself so I can feel okay because I don't look like that, or I want to look like that. So there's always still this comparison that I feel is going on. And even when the world of spirituality, like I'll talk about it. And it's, so
Yeah.
many people now have so many different views on what spirituality is and isn't. And you can do this and you can't do that. And you have to do that. Stop overcomplicating things. And I think with self love, it became the same thing. Stop overcomplicating things. Like
Yeah.
literally love yourself like you would absolutely love another human. But we're so self judgmental that I think it's easier for us to say, oh no, it's better to love somebody else than love me because loving me would be selfish. But I think that's just fear of really not wanting to look within. How do you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think again, you alluded to it, and I also did, where, in the beginning, when I was starting to kind of like turn over the concept of self love in my own mind, what I noticed is that it was very much about like, I felt like I did love myself. And in my own perception, I was like, oh, yeah, self love. Like, of course I have self love. But then when I actually started to pay attention to myself and my responses to myself on the day to day, I realized that I was like, hypercritical, always judging myself, making comparisons, all of these things. And I'm like, wait, this isn't self love. I have love for myself in this kind of like idealistic, abstract sense. But when it gets down to the nitty gritty of who and what I actually am as a human, it's completely conditional. And so,
Mm-hmm.
it started to remind me of, the difference between unconditional love and conditional love, and how that plays into our relationships, and most importantly, our relationship with ourselves. And so, really breaking it down and starting to understand how self love, it's it's much bigger than just liking yourself when you show up the way you want to, or liking yourself when you look a certain way, or say the right things, or get the right response from people, or feel validated. It's about sitting with yourself through all of the pain and the shame, and the things that you sometimes feel guilty about, but they're honestly and authentically who you are, just like you would or what you would want from a partner. And so I think, I mean, you said something about empathy, and I think that self-love is absolutely one of the keys to a more empathetic world. Because like
Mm-hmm.
what you said it's easier sometimes to give love to others. And I think that that's why, again, especially as women, we can really overgive. We can, become codependent very easily with our partners. We can spend lots of time taking care of our family members or people less fortunate, whatever. And really, that in and of itself can sometimes be like a symptom of this desire of like, I'm not good enough, so I have to prove it by showing it to other people. And that's not actually real love either. That's kind of a selfish use of other people's misfortune or other people's need for your energy to make yourself feel important. And I think that true empathy and true love for like other human beings really comes from understanding yourself and understanding that even in your imperfection and even in your darkness, that you're worthy of love, and so are other people. That we
Mm-hmm.
don't get to be, judge and jury for everyone, and that includes ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm laughing for several things, but the yeah, it's like, okay, I just lost even my train of thought. So I'm laughing, number one, because the episode right before this one, so the one right
Uh-huh.
before this one, we're talking about partnerships and relationships and self-love, and the
Okay.
fact that so many of us enter a relationship based on this conditional love. If I am this, will you love me and not leave me? If I do this, will you love me and leave me? It's all these conditional things. And he was talking about that. So if you guys are interested, I'm definitely telling you, go check that video out, because it was such an interesting twist. But it's the same thing we're talking about, because now we're taking it a step further with you. We can't really be in a partnership and in a relationship authentically, truly honest and loving and great if we don't have that with ourselves, because we are, like you said at some point, our first relationship. And now that I'm thinking about it, it's kind of like we're missing all these things within ourselves that we're expecting our partner to
Exactly.
fulfill. And then it's like we're giving them this responsibility, not even telling them. It's like we just have this responsibility hanging over their heads, and then we blame them for not doing this and not doing that. So it's kind of like going back and forth between this episode and that episode, because it's kind of like then there's relationship issues, right? It's like, okay, go back and forth.
Yeah.
I should do a mix of both of them, because it's funny. It's kind of like the relationships fail for so many different reasons. But if we all have the self-love inside of us, we're not bringing that baggage. We're actually becoming partners, which is what he was talking about. So I love that fact. And then the other one that you were saying is, you're right. So many people kind of give in that conditional way to kind of feel something. And again, I go back to they're trying to feel something important. They're trying to feel some kind of love or attachment because they're scared to look within, because
Hmm.
they're kind of like, what am I to love? I have all these defaults. I have all these things. And it's like that cycle, right?
Right.
Over and over again.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, it is really interesting. As I started to kind of go, like I said, on my own journey, it did really start to reflect in my relationships how much pressure I was putting on the other person to love aspects of me that I didn't even love yet, that I hadn't integrated. And how really a lot of the anger, the frustration, like the emotional outbursts I was having came down to the fact that I wanted this other person to give me permission to fully be
Mm,
myself, to fully show up. And then I was like, wait, if I can't give that permission to myself, then how can anyone else ever be expected to even know that part of me? So I was
mhm,
asking someone to do the impossible, really. And, my relationships have definitely improved since then. I mean, overall, I mean, I think that self love, it really does, when you can learn to see yourself clearly, even the parts of yourself that you've been taught to ignore, if you can
mhm,
bring those parts of yourself back in and look at them and embrace them and learn how to work with the things that even maybe you think might not be so good, but you can like figure out how to work with them, it really does change everything. I mean, a great example of that is like ambition. You know, ambition is one of those weird qualities that like somehow in our society it's it's praised, but at the same time, it can be like a big negative. Again, especially for women, it's like, oh, this person's like too ambitious. She must think she's better than everyone else. She must think like who is she to think that she can achieve that? Like, why can't she just be content? Something one of my ex-boyfriends
Mhm.
always says, like, why can't you just be grateful for what you have? You know, so it's like as a woman, I've been internalizing, ambition as a negative for a lot of
Right,
my life,
right.
and I finally was like, no, like I need to understand that ambition, it can be bad, just like anything. I mean, anything energetic. I mean,
Any
anything in
extreme.
this exactly any things are neutral, but the intention we put
Mhm.
on them makes them what they are. And so, it's just working with those things within yourself and being like, okay, this trait, you might think it's toxic or negative or bad, or it could be harmful or whatever. It's like, okay, look at it, sit with it. What is it really about? And how can that energy maybe be utilized and directed in service of something higher, in service of something that, you know, is going to make you feel like you're living your best life?
Right. Let me ask you something, because we are at a point where we've realized this, right? That's why we're having this conversation. But a few years ago, we would have heard this conversation, and just like you said at the beginning, oh, I love myself. What advice or what helped you, or what do you tell people, or what way can somebody be like, okay, do I love myself, or do I accept myself? Or do I fake I love myself and don't realize that I do? Do you understand? Because there's like a difference in like
Yeah,
what I feel now, as in like, oh my God, self-love is this, versus what I thought a few years ago of like, oh, self-love is like a bubble bath and a manicure. Like for
right.
me, that was the self-love that they were teaching. Of course, I'm talking about 15, 20, 30 years ago. Um, but now that I've embodied it and I see it so differently, I can feel the difference. But for somebody who's not there yet, what would you suggest them?
Yeah, that's kind of a hard question
I know,
because
sorry.
no, 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 it's an interesting question though. I'm thinking about it because, you know, for a lot of people, change comes from like hitting rock bottom or hitting a point where they're just like running up against a wall of like, why am I checking all these boxes, but I'm still not happy? Or, I seem like, I feel like I'm a great person, but none of my relationships are working out. So it's often things like that. And that's how it was for me. For me personally, it was like the feeling of, why my life should be great. I should feel great because my life, from the outside looking in looks pretty great.
Mhm.
Um and so I think that really self-honesty I think is everything. And I think that if you're someone that is listening to this podcast and you think you love yourself and you don't necessarily feel like anything that we're talking about or that we have to say is really of much use to you, I would be curious to know like what your life really looks like if you were going to assess it completely honestly. And I think that again it's a tall order because again I think people think they're being self-honest even if they're not. I mean, that's the whole thing about the unconscious and the subconscious is that until you're able to even acknowledge that it's there, you can't work with it. So, what I would say is no matter what you think about your life, no matter what you think about self-love or like is life going the way you want it to? Are your relationships working? Are you feeling fulfilled? Are you feeling like you have a purpose? Do you wake up in the morning and feel like there's a reason to get out of bed and go do things? And I think if the answer is no to any or some of these, then I think I would just say get curious. Like, look a little bit deeper. I think another thing that often, people don't notice is just addictions that can creep up in those little ways. Are you numbing? Are you coming home from work and watching Netflix for 5 hours every single night?
Right.
Are you drinking a bottle of wine every night? Like, things like that where are you in a tailspin if you don't get to the gym every day? Like, those things are all they're all worth looking at. And so sometimes it's just being really honest and saying, like, is this what I want? Is this the right thing for me? And then getting curious about maybe what the message is underneath. And then, I mean, that can be a bit of a Pandora's box, right? But um it's well worth opening if you really do have that glimmer of inner understanding that maybe you're available for more.
I think just opening with the curiosity, like you said,
Yeah,
will open a Pandora's box, because it's something that I tell my clients and I tell my people and I tell everybody all the time. Don't believe me. Go experience
right.
it for yourself.
Exactly.
Because it's kind of like, however I began my route and my experience and my path to wherever has led me today was out of curiosity. And it's probably always different for everybody else. And it's kind of that. It's like, okay, this called my attention or this called my attention. And then you kind of find your way. So I think you nailed it right now when you said, just be curious. Maybe you do have self-love. Maybe you don't. Maybe if you have self-love, you're not even doubting it. You're like, oh my God, no, yeah, I feel it. And if you're like, yeah, I have self-love. Okay, then be curious. We can always have more. And that's what I tell
Right.
everybody. You're
Yes.
wealthy, you can always have more. You're healthy, you can always be healthier. We
Yeah.
can always have more, because again, that's probably a totally different episode, but that's probably what I'm going to want to do one day, because it's so true. We limit ourselves even in thinking, oh, I love myself. Well, you could love yourself more. I love my partner. Well, you could probably love your partner more. So I love that you shared all of that, because it's true. There's so many things that can come out of this once we have that self-love for ourselves.
Mhm.
Our relationships, our work, just like you were mentioning, everything works out a little bit different because we're running on a different love vibe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that is so cool. Okay. Honey, I know we're running out of time. Thank you for joining me today.
You're
I'm
so
gonna put it
welcome.
down in the show notes. Where can people reach out to you? Where can they find you? Where can they go email you and say, I opened the Pandora's box. What do I do now?
Yeah, absolutely. You can visit my website. It's awakeningschandra.com. And Chandra is Chandra. And then you can also find me on Instagram. It's at Awakening Chandra. And I love to be a resource. I love to connect with people. So I'm definitely here for the curious and, want to be available to anyone that wants to reach out and connect and, see if working with me makes sense, or if not, just, vibing person to person. And you never know where a connection is going to take you. And again, that's the curiosity. I feel like that really, just listening to you say that last little bit there, it really kind of clarified what I was trying to say about curiosity, in the sense that I think one of the biggest red flags is if you're not curious. If you're at a point in your life where you think you have it all figured out, you think you don't need any help, you don't want to hear what anybody else has to say, that often is like a defense mechanism. Like what you said at the very beginning of the show, we're defensive because we don't want to admit that we actually can be open and available to so much. And
Right.
that's why I think once you go on the path of opening the Pandora's box and wanting to really explore what self-love really means, you'll find, exactly like what you said, that there can always be more. That we're always learning. We're not sitting here saying that we have it all figured out and that we never
Oh,
have
hell
moments
no.
of doubt. It's like it's a journey, and it's always expanding. And I think that's the most exciting part.
Yeah, and have fun with it, because it
Yeah.
sounds scary to open the Pandora's box and not know what's gonna come out. It sounds scary for a lot of people, and I'm not gonna lie, it's not always easy, because it's
Right.
not. And
Right.
even myself, I have moments that I go through things and I'm destroyed and in hell for 2 weeks, and then I finally come out of it. I'm like, blah, and then you hear like the, oh my God, this is great, you know?
Yeah,
But I am as human as the rest of us. I have my ups, I have my downs, I have my spirals. And that's why I like doing the show, because I like people to learn and I want the audience to know there's so many of us here that we're like, look, we get it. It's not easy, but make it fun and you're not alone. Because going
absolutely.
through all these rabbit holes can feel scary sometimes. And I think what we were talking about, that's why people sometimes really don't want to go through it. But that's why there's resources like yourself, like this show, like the work that we all do, so that the audience knows, okay, who do I resonate to and who do I say, okay, I need help. You know, just walk with me while I open this Pandora's box because it is scary. But is it worth
Yeah,
it? Hell, it's worth it. For sure it's worth it.
absolutely.
Okay. So we just went on a whole other riff. So we will say goodbye again.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, honey.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we'll talk to everybody soon. Bye-bye.
All right.
Thank you for watching until the end. My question to you is, what is the one thing that you have learned from today's video that you can apply exactly today? Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and go catch our next video.